Hi, everybody. I want to welcome everybody here with us this day. My name is Ken Sloan. I am Director of Stewardship and Connectional Ministries here at Discipleship Ministries. I work with the DCM specifically, and so through that role, Greg Berquist and I support this effort, which is really led by the Council of Bishops, trying to provide you with the best resources as you start up. I'm really happy that I am able to host this event with our main speaker for today, who is Becky Posey Williams. She is the Senior Director for Sexual Ethics and Advocacy at the General Commission on Role and Status of Women. She is a great resource for you to get to know, not just through this webinar, but to be someone whose email and phone number are handy to you as you journey through this new role that you have, that you'll have an advocate and somebody who can speak to you and help guide you when you find yourself in some of the situations that she'll be describing to you during our webinar today. So my role is just to kind of be here and help you. I do want to mention as we start that we may have some new DCMs who have signed on today, and I know that you're going to find this information interesting. I think it'll be applicable to your role, especially as you work with staff around you in the conference office. But on your behalf, I have extended grace to Becky, because much of this content that she'll talk about is kind of directed to the complaint process that DSs will find themselves involved in. I've extended her the grace to not have to say DSs and DCMs in every place. So when you hear her talking about the DS's role, I know as a DCM you can adapt that to the role that you may have in supervising staff at the conference office. So I just wanted to say that up front. I am very happy to be here. Unfortunately, when we use video, I see how badly my hair is receding, and so as I turn it over to Becky, I'm going to turn my video off, and I won't have to look at that, and you won't have to look at me as well. So Becky, thanks so much for taking the time. Becky is in Chicago based, so we're all kind of connecting from different places. And Becky, thanks for taking the time to lead us, and you've got control over the slides. So I'm gonna close my video window and relax and enjoy your presentation.
All right. Thank you so much, Ken. I think your hair looks fine.
Well, thank you.
So good morning, everyone. I am so very glad that each of you have decided to join us for the next hour or so as we talk about this daunting challenge of addressing the issue of sexual misconduct in the church. More specifically, how you navigate through the complaint process once you become aware of a concern or complaint of sexual misconduct in your particular district.
Yeah, thanks, Becky. I should have mentioned that we also have this slide up here to give you an indication, to give Becky an indication where you are from across the country. So, Becky, if you can go back to that map, and Jason will explain to you, I think there's an arrow tool up on the top left-hand side.
Yeah, sure, be happy to do that. Folks, in the upper left-hand corner of your screen, you'll find an arrow icon. That's the pointer tool. Go ahead and click on that to turn on that tool. And then just click on the part of the world that you're joining us from today. And there we go. Look at that all popping up. Wow. We're from all over.
Wonderful.
That's great.
Thank you to those of you on the West Coast. It's a little early for you this morning, so appreciate you getting up before your first cup of coffee to join us for some learning.
That looks great.
Okay, and a few more coming in. And again, you'll find that pointer tool in the upper left-hand corner of the screen.
Okay, great. Thanks. I'm sorry I missed leading us into that, but Becky, now I'm going to take it away and share with us.
All right, great. Thank you. So what we are going to spend the day, we could spend the day, the next hour talking about is specifically the issue around sexual ethics and misconduct of a sexual nature within the life of the church. As I said earlier, this is oftentimes, for most of us, a fairly daunting challenge to navigate through these scenarios. I can tell you up front, there is never a simple case. They are always complex and complicated. And I can also say to you, as I said to one of your colleagues yesterday on the phone, this is work that was never, ever, ever intended to be done alone. So know that you have resources available throughout our connection, and I just so encourage you to not ever feel like you have to have all the answers and know how to do this completely on your own. Reach out for help. It will be taking good care of yourself, and it will probably be adding an element of checks and balances to everything that must be attended to in these particular cases. The reality is some of you have walked into your new position and there are unresolved cases that you have been made aware of. The other reality is some of you have already had concerns expressed to you by laity or clergy within your district. And so you're already finding yourself in the position of what will be my next steps regarding the process for dealing with a formal complaint of sexual misconduct. So again, I'm glad you're here, and I so encourage you to ask any and all questions you may have. If we run out of time to answer them, I will do my best to follow up via email to you and give you the best answers that I can, or put you in contact with those who can perhaps do a better job of that than myself. These first 4 slides are going to ground us in what we believe as United Methodists. And this is important for us as we deal with this issue of sexual misconduct, that chargeable offense. It is simply important that we are grounded in what we, as United Methodists, believe constitutes the chargeable offense of sexual misconduct. So with that, we'll begin with our first slide. And this is simply the definition of sexual misconduct as is written in our 2016 Book of Resolutions. This is in resolution number 2044, which you can find on page 776 in the Book of Resolutions. A couple of things that I want to mention to you about this definition is, one, it is all about a betrayal of sacred trust within a ministerial relationship. And we'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. It is described as a continuum of sexual or gender-directed behaviors, and I want you to pay careful attention that this is by either a lay or clergy person. I'm always a bit surprised by how many people in the United Methodist denomination are not aware that the chargeable offenses listed in paragraph 2702 in our Book of Discipline can be related to either clergy or lay persons. This can involve paid or unpaid, and you see the list, the continuum of behaviors. So the important thing is, once you receive a complaint or a concern is brought to you, do the behaviors that are described in that complaint or that concern constitute this chargeable offense? Included in the definition of sexual misconduct is the use of pornography. We have always recognized that in terms of use of pornography on church-related equipment. That might be a computer that is provided to you by the church. It may be a cell phone that is provided to you by the church. Perhaps it's the use of pornography in the church-provided parsonage. In 2016, our general agency introduced legislation at General Conference that was passed and added an additional paragraph to paragraph 161 in our social principles in the Book of Discipline. So I encourage you to crack open your Book of Discipline and look at letter Q. It offers to you a description of the negative effects of pornography on individuals, on families, and on our society. And I would offer to you that I believe paragraph 2, the second paragraph in this letter Q of our social principles, may do some help in offering to you a working definition of pornography. I want to go back to the previous slide because there was an issue that I failed to mention. I want you to always acknowledge that sexual misconduct is a separate chargeable offense from infidelity or non-celibacy and singleness. So often, or too often, I should say, we hear the behaviors of sexual misconduct named as an affair, and that is simply not an accurate naming of what has happened. Sexual misconduct is always about the misuse and abuse of power. An affair suggests that there is consent, and when there is a differentiation of power among two people, then there cannot be consent. One of the best scriptures that I have found and use almost always in my training is the scripture around the story of King David and Bathsheba. And I'll tell you a couple of reasons I like this scripture. First of all, King David represents the best of us and the worst of us. He represents a person who has had much power and has used it well. A lot of good things were accomplished by him. And then that exact same person turns around and takes the power that they have and misuses it and abuses it. And so I just lift up that scripture to you, because as you continue to grow in knowledge of this particular role that you will find yourself in, I just think it is absolutely a must that this be grounded well in Scripture. Sexual harassment is also included as a part of sexual misconduct. Our social principles in paragraph 161, letter I, do a really good job of giving you the definition of that as unwanted sexual or gender-directed behavior. And I want for this definition, one particular thing that I want you as district superintendents to really gather into your knowledge bank is the fact that intention is not relevant when it comes to charges of sexual harassment. So often I hear DSs, I hear bishops or other judicatory leaders say, well, this person never intended for that to be the message. And the reality is, it doesn't really matter what the intention was. What matters is how the behavior was received. And so I simply offer that to you as you have things brought to you and you find yourself in this supervisory position of your colleagues now, that is just a key piece for you to pay attention to and remember. And then finally, I offer to you some excerpts from our social principles. Our social principles are foundational beliefs that ground us as United Methodists. Paragraph 161 in the discipline speaks to the nurturing community. And so again, I've pulled out 5 pieces from paragraph 161 that are relevant to our conversation today. Letter F says we reject the erroneous notion that one gender is superior to another. And folks, what I want you to understand is this is not new language. This language has been in our discipline. And so as, again, you find yourself in that position of supervision, it's important for us as individuals to pay attention to what do we believe regarding these points. The next three talk specifically about sexual misconduct, sexual harassment, and name it as always an exploitation of a power relationship. I will add to this that in 2012, our Judicial Council made a ruling in Judicial Council ruling number 1228 that it is never appropriate for clergy to be in a romantic relationship with a parishioner simply because of the imbalance of power. And so again, within our United Methodist denomination, we see our highest governing body also acknowledging that when we talk about sexual misconduct, we are talking about an exploitation of a power relationship. So I think we will take a pause here and see if there are any questions.
Okay, there are no questions that have come in at this point, and I'll remind folks you can send your questions using the Q&A panel. Take a moment, look on the right-hand side of your screen for the question mark icon, and when you click on the question mark icon, that's how you send us your questions. All right, Becky, thank you. Back to you.
Okay, thanks, Jason. And regarding those previous 4 slides, let me reiterate one more time that upon receiving concerns and upon receiving formal complaints, naming this behavior what it is a crucial piece. 2 things I would say to you. Never underestimate the power of healing that happens when you allow yourself to be willing to hear another person's story. And so my hope is that when someone comes forth to you and expresses concern of behaviors that they have been a part of receiving, or they have put in writing a formal complaint, that you will be clear to them in your appreciation of them coming forward with this information. And again, I simply say to you, please don't underestimate the power of the healing that can happen in setting that tone. I stated this earlier, and it deserves attention one more time. As we are asked to do this work, and we all are, it's not work any of us really want to do, and it's work we all must do. It is important for us to continually check in with ourselves about what we are hearing in these stories and how we are relating to them. And so I offer this sentence to you that I stand behind 100%, that sexual misconduct is fueled by deeply rooted attitudes about power, authority, and gender. And it will be prevented when these attitudes are challenged and overhauled. And you are in a powerful position as district superintendents and DCMs to be leadership in challenging some of these attitudes regarding gender or attitudes regarding power and authority. And I so encourage you to do this. I grew up in the deep South in the United States. You may have picked that up from my accent already. And I can tell you that I was there in the early 60s when racism was at its worst. And people knew this was wrong. Many people knew this was wrong and yet allowed it to continue to happen. And I can say to you as a lifelong United Methodist, it was my United Methodist Church in my small town in the Deep South that took a prophetic stand and declared that this is wrong. And I will never forget that. And I'm simply offering this sentence to you and asking you to consider your role in leadership regarding challenging the deeply rooted attitudes about power, authority, and gender. One of the other things that I hear often, I heard this from one of your colleagues yesterday, as a matter of fact, on a phone consultation regarding a couple of incidents that the DS had become aware of. And this DS said, what I've been told is that this person is just that person. They're a person who makes demeaning and degrading and belittling comments about one gender. And so we talked about this a little bit. And I understand that there are people who continue to do that. And again, my challenge to you is, are you willing, in the name of prevention and in the name of response, are you willing to challenge these continued deeply rooted attitudes and beliefs? I think you can tell I could talk about that a long time. This is a powerful sentence to me, and one that I offer in every training of clergy that I am involved in. To simply say to the clergy you are in supervision of, you have a sacred trust. And then encouraging them to pay attention to what we believe as United Methodists that is set forth in our Book of Discipline. We talk about chargeable offenses as a betrayal of the sacred trust. And with this sacred trust, you have the fiduciary responsibility to always act in the best interest of those whom you serve. This is a teaching piece for our clergy and also, honestly, for our lay leadership that I don't think we can provide too often. As often as you can weave this into your work, I encourage you to do so. Because when a clergy colleague violates the sacred trust of ordination, the ministry of every Christian is undermined. And I'll be honest with you, friends, when I hear alleged victims say to me, I don't know when I will ever step foot into a church again, it's a belly punch for me. And it is some of the saddest expressions of faith lost that I think we can hear. I will go on record as saying to you, I believe when this sacred trust is betrayed and violated in the name of sexual misconduct, spiritual violence has happened. And that is simply not okay. We must and we can do better. But we have to help lift this up to the awareness of our clergy all the time, and not just once every 4 years in an ethics training. This is an image that I absolutely love for so many reasons, and all of you are familiar with this passage from the 24th chapter of Luke, where Jesus appears. And I think the important piece here that I want to offer to you is, again, in your role as a district superintendent, I want you to pay attention to Jesus's posture in this story. He asks questions. He walks alongside. He listens. He receives information. He lets his friends share the confusion that they're feeling right now openly and freely. And I just think that is an incredible image of good supervision. And so I offer it to you from that perspective, that you would posture yourself especially in your work of hearing and receiving the stories related to sexual misconduct complaints in a similar way, that you would ask questions, that you would encourage open and free expression of confusion and fear and whatever else that you may hear. A question for you to ask yourself right now might be, does my posture as a district superintendent encourage questions and sharing freely? Let me say that again. Does my posture as a district superintendent or a DCM encourage questions and sharing freely? So as an extension of the bishop's office, I offer these three distinct roles that you will find yourself in. And again, many of you maybe have already found yourself in it. As we go into this slide, this is what I want to say to you. As district superintendents, often you will be the one who sets the tone for how the church will respond to the information being brought forward. Will the story be heard? Will the goal be to seek to protect the well-being of all people involved, or only your clergy brother or sister, if that is who is being accused, or if that is who is being offended and is the alleged victim? Or again, will it be about seeking to protect the well-being of all involved in this? It's not uncommon for us to rush to the side of clergy because they are central to the church. And sometimes when we do that, again, whether intended or not, the other party often feels like they are less than, their concerns, their well-being are less important than that of clergy. So what message are you sending? Are you willing to say, as I said earlier, I am glad you brought your concerns forward? Are you willing to say that? None of us want to hear this. And are you willing to say, I'm glad you came forward. We want to know this information. I encourage you to do whatever work you may need to do to get to that place where you can freely and clearly say to the person sitting there, or sending an email to you, or writing a letter and mailing it to you, you can clearly say, I'm glad these concerns were brought forward. So the first role is that of administrative, and it will promote a fair process for all parties, and it will follow the procedures that are set forth in our Book of Discipline. We'll talk in the next slide specifically about the complaint process and where you can find that. You or the bishop will probably be the one, if the accused admits guilt or the investigation uncovers guilt, and if that person is in a leadership role and is placed on some type of leave, you or the bishop will probably be the person that will be asked to go in and make an announcement to the congregation regarding the receipt of a formal complaint and the leave that the minister has been placed on. You also will be the person that is going forward in the supervision of the interim pastor who may be brought into some of these particular situations. You also maybe be the person who walks alongside a response team if you have a response team. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a few minutes. So you are going to have a huge role, possibly, in following up and walking through the process administratively as well as supervisory. And then the third and final piece on this is the pastoral part. Our Book of Discipline says that when we receive a formal complaint of a chargeable offense, that we will respond in a way that holds people accountable for their behavior and offers healing for all people affected. I will tell you, I have a passionate belief we cannot provide opportunities for healing, for congregation, families has been found and guilt has been determined. So administrative, supervisory, and pastoral, that's a lot of responsibility. So this is a simple example. A parishioner calls the DS to report her suspicion that Reverend J is using internet pornography on his office computer. Is this a complaint? And the answer to that is no. It's not in writing, and it's not a signed statement. And after the complaint in writing, the DS receives the signed letter later that week. Should this allegation now be handled with a complaint? And the answer to that is yes. We've already discussed the use of pornography, and we can oftentimes do a lot of rationalization around pornography. If someone does in privacy of their own home, and that I want to say to you, go read like your own counsel. The other thing I want to take just a moment and address regarding this complaint. I always say to district superintendents, ministerial leader, clergy or lay, that describes and offers behaviors that could possibly constitute the chargeable offense of sexual misconduct. I want to say to you that I encourage you to respond to that concern as seriously as you would respond if it were a formal complaint. Just yesterday, again, I was on the phone for quite some time with one of your colleagues, and no complaint had been filed yet. In other words, nothing had been written and signed. However, the senior pastor had brought to the staff parish chair's attention and ultimately to the district superintendent's attention two concerns that had been shared with him regarding two separate lay people. And this DS immediately went to the bishop, and the bishop immediately said, why don't you call Becky and just be in some consultation and dialogue about some possible best next steps. So I want to encourage you to do that. You will see my phone number throughout this presentation and my email address at the end. Just know that you have a resource here. And again, this work is not to be done alone. When a complaint or a concern comes in, I would offer to you the word patterns. Are you seeing patterns of behavior described in what is being told to you? Oftentimes, if it is a one-time isolated incident, it can be dealt with without a formal complaint. That's not always the case, but there are certainly times that can happen. So pay attention to those patterns. Use this example, use this information in teaching to the ministers within your district. Encourage them to be with their staff parish chairs. Encourage them to be with their staff if they are in an appointment that has staff, in better understanding what we believe as United Methodist around this subject and our process for responding. This slide offers an overview of the complaint process. immediately upon receipt, if you are the person who receives the complaint first, then you immediately take this to the bishop. It is absolutely mandatory that the bishop receive this written statement that is being brought forth. The bishop will be in communication with the Board of Ordained Ministry chair, alerting that a complaint has been filed. Again, I encourage you to receive all concerns very seriously. There are times the district superintendent becomes the person who actually files the formal complaint based on what they've heard. I've been involved in the follow-up of cases and the response to cases where the district superintendent was indeed the person who filed the formal complaint. The complaint process is outlined and defined very clearly in paragraph 362 in the 2016 Book of Discipline. If you're still working out of 2012, it's paragraph 363. The complaint process is set up for ethical violations that are part of all of the chargeable offenses for clergy and professing members in paragraph 2702.1 in the Book of Discipline. The supervisory process begins with the receipt of a formal complaint, and the receipt of a formal complaint is when the bishop receives it. The complaint must be resolved, referred, or dismissed within 90 days. There is the possibility of one 30-day extension when all the parties agree. I've just been in a consultation role with the case in an annual conference where the 30-day extension was requested on behalf of the bishop to do a little more work, and it was granted with the consent of all the parties. The only exception to this is the exception of abeyance. And basically, abeyance is when a complaint is held indefinitely in some type of a civil court case where civil authorities are involved, or perhaps an investigation by civil authorities. In this situation, it's important that the complaint be reviewed every 90 days by the bishop and by the Board of Ordained Ministry. And again, all of that information is clearly outlined in your Book of Discipline in paragraph 362. Jason mentioned to you at the beginning that there is a packet of information that was, I believe, emailed to you and perhaps is in, I believe it's in a Dropbox. Is that correct, Jason? I don't know if you can hear me or not. Okay.
Oh, there we go. I'm sorry, I had the mute button on. Yes, you are correct.
Okay. And so I want to bring your attention to one particular, or a couple of pages that are in that packet that offer to you excerpts of key Book of Resolutions and Book of Discipline paragraphs for work in this particular issue of prevention and response to sexual misconduct. So hopefully that will just be a handy, easy reference piece for you to turn to when you have any questions about what the Book of Resolutions or what the Book of Discipline says regarding complaints and chargeable offenses of sexual misconduct. There are four possible outcomes from this supervisory response. The first is that there can be a just resolution. Just resolution, and this is what I want to focus on with you. A just resolution is about the process. It's not necessarily about the end result or the sheet of paper that is agreed upon. Just resolution focuses on the process of all parties working together with the guidance of the Episcopal office to address the harm and the hurt that has happened as a result of the behavior that was that happened in the boundary that was violated. So again, a just resolution, when you talk about a just resolution, you're talking about entering into a process of dialogue where all parties ultimately reach an agreement that says we can live with these conditions that have been set forth as a result of our conversations. The second thing is that the bishop can dismiss this formal complaint based on believing that the behaviors that have been brought forward do not constitute the chargeable offense of sexual misconduct. And they would do this in consultation with Cabinet and the Board of Ordained Ministry. The bishop can also refer this formal complaint to a person who is identified to serve in the role as counsel for the church. This is an elder in good standing in the church, and this is for the purposes of a little further investigation about what has been brought forward. The counsel for the church is responsible for developing a bill of charges and presenting whatever information is uncovered to the bishop. And then finally, and as a last resort, a formal complaint can be referred for trial. Again, this is a last resort and something that none of us ever want to see happen, and we know there are times that it does happen. Okay, I've been doing a lot of talking, so perhaps there is a question or two that someone may have at this point.
All right, thank you, Becky. And I'll remind folks you can send in your questions using the Q&A panel. Just click on the question mark icon that you see there in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. And Ken, I think you had a question come in on your end.
Well, I was just going to raise it. I'm thinking more and more as I hear Becky's presentation about the importance of, in both these roles of the DS and the DCM, of being aware of that power dynamic that Becky talked about. And, you know, I think we kind of projected sometimes to the clergy who are serving, who are reporting to the DS, or to, in the case of the DCM, to people who work around you or in that setting. But, I guess for me, it's always trying to be conscious of, what is my role in this? Where is the power in the situation as I'm, dealing with that, and being conscious of that all the time. Because, we'll have, male district superintendents who will have, female pastors who will be in their charge. In the very role of the district superintendent, one day you're a colleague of your clergy colleagues, and the next day you're in a position of power. And we don't always remind people of that transition and how that happens. And I just think the more this thought is in my mind about this that you shared, about really being conscious of all of the different dynamics of that, of our power roles. And one of the things that we'll do with new DSs and DCMs is we'll have a session about intercultural competency, and there are power dynamics as well, and those kind of things that we keep in mind in that way. So I think, Becky, this is just such an important thing that you stressed in a number of these different places, and just reminding ourselves that even if we don't feel like, we are big managers of all the things around us, we do have power that the church imbues to us. In the role, and having served as a DCM and not a DS, had to be aware of that. I always like to be in a very collegial kind of relationship, but to remember that I did have, the church did give me in that role a position of authority over folks. So again, it's that ongoing consciousness I think is so important.
Absolutely, yeah.
Becky, we had a couple of questions come in regarding the complaint process.
Okay.
If you would comment on when it is not a formal complaint. In other words, if it's not written, someone just called or someone said at a meeting, what are next steps? What do we do from here?
Well, and that's just a great question, and one that comes up daily in my work. First of all, I will say again, I want to encourage the district superintendent or the DCM to receive that information as seriously as they would receive it if it were a written and signed formal complaint. The courage that it takes for a person to come forward, whether that person's lay or clergy, is huge, and we should never underestimate that. There's a lot riding for most people when they make the decision to come forward. I've listened to clergy persons who have come forward with concerns. They're terrified to file a formal complaint because they think the retaliation is going to be tremendous against them, and it's going to affect their future appointments and things of that nature. So I just would like for us to get in a habit of receiving any information that is a concern around behaviors that could possibly constitute sexual misconduct as serious, whether it is written and signed or not. Obviously, again, I go back to that image of Jesus and that posture of being open to hearing the confusion, the concerns, the fears, that posture of asking questions in an effort to better understand what is going on right now with this particular person. And so I would say, if it is a concern and not a signed, formal, written complaint, that you would be aware of being in that posture. Thank you for coming forward. Thank you for telling me about this. These are concerns that I want to know about. I'd like to hear more. And then perhaps offering what the formal complaint process is to that person, offering to stand alongside this person if they make a decision to file a formal complaint. I've had stories of district superintendents who will say to a parishioner, and let me just tell you, oftentimes that district superintendent was their former minister, and now they're in the position of district superintendent, and so they feel very comfortable going to the DS and sit down and tell the DS about the pattern of texting inappropriate messages and inappropriate images and sexualized behavior in content, sharing all that information with the DS and having the DS say, I will go with you to hand this formal complaint to the bishop if that's what you want to do. And then at some point, again, I remind DSs, based on the information you're hearing, if you believe that this is enough information that would warrant a formal complaint being written and filed, you can do that. You can be the one who files that formal complaint. But at the very least, what I would say is that follow-up with the bishop needs to happen regarding these concerns. Documentation regarding these concerns needs to take place. Again, it's not, I can tell you story after story after story. It's not uncommon to be involved in a situation where a person has admitted guilt or the investigation has revealed guilt of behaviors that have been brought forward, to find that there were 4 concerns or even written letters of concerns that were in this person's personnel file, but no follow-up happened because it wasn't a written formal complaint. And again, we can do better than this. And again, I don't have all the answers, but I will tell you, I am the one person in your United Methodist denomination that is employed in part for being a resource for you, or to be a resource for you. And so I just simply say, when you find yourself in that situation of I'm not sure what my next step should be, please don't hesitate to pick up the phone and call me, and we can have conversation about this.
Becky, there was a follow-up question to that. If you could briefly comment, are there parameters for involving the conference chancellor?
Are there parameters? Well, I always say to the bishop that I think when the bishop receives a formal complaint, I think one of the first things a bishop should do is be in consultation with his or her chancellor. And so I think, that's a good question. I'm not sure I can answer that further than that, because I'm not sure exactly what the parameters are within all of the annual conferences. But absolutely, if it's a formal complaint, the bishop should be in immediate consultation with the chancellor. I suppose if it's questions regarding, am I mandated to report this information because this is involving a child or a youth, then perhaps that would be questions that would be appropriate to go ahead and be in contact with the chancellor about.
Okay, thank you very much. Why don't we go ahead and talk about response teams, and I'll gather some more questions here in the background.
Okay, thank you. So a couple of questions for you around response teams. First of all, I'd like for you to think about, have you ever served in a church where misconduct has occurred and it was not addressed with the congregation? I have certainly been a member of a congregation where misconduct had happened and it had not been addressed with the congregation. But we continued to hear rumblings of it even 10 years later. And so there was sort of that dark cloud that hung over the congregation of that church for a long time, simply because we did not openly address this within the congregation. We were living in community under that belief that if you talk about it, it's going to make things worse, and it's shame-based and embarrassment, and so you don't talk about this stuff in any type of a transparent way. So another question I'd like to ask you, and Jason, you may be able to help me navigate by using the green check or the red X that you will see listed below your name on the right-hand side. And I'd like for you to, if your answer is yes, the green check, if your answer is no, the red X, how many of you know that your annual conference has a trained response team that can be deployed to go into congregations, work with congregations and staff around healing following an incident of sexual misconduct?
All right, I'm seeing quite a few green check marks there. And again, folks, you'll find the green check mark or the red X right underneath your name there on the right-hand side of the screen. All right, wow.
All right.
Overwhelming majority that are saying yes so far.
Yes, that's great. That's great. A response team cannot function without being in partnership with the cabinet. And I teach that everywhere I go. You can train people to serve in a response team ministry, but if it is not supported and in partnership with the cabinet, it will not work. So as a new district superintendent, I would like to encourage you to recommend that a member or a few members of your annual conference response team have 15 minutes at your next cabinet meeting to come in, introduce themselves, and give you just a little glimpse of what they do as a trained response team. When I am training in annual conferences to help establish response teams, it is not uncommon for me to hear former district superintendents who are part of the audience of this training say publicly, "I would have given anything to have had this resource 10 years ago or 8 years ago when I was a DS." Just recently in a training, I'll share this with you real quickly, just recently in a training, I had a former DS say, I tried to be everything to everyone, and it was an impossibility. And the thought of having this group of people that I know are trained and their whole emphasis is on healing following the trauma and the loss that has happened within their community of faith because of sexual misconduct by a leader would have been an amazing resource to have. So again, our Book of Resolutions and our Book of Discipline very clearly identify the use of response teams in cases of sexual misconduct. I will say to you that many annual conferences use their response teams beyond sexual misconduct. When there's any type of a trauma that has a negative effect on the congregation and or the staff, it's not uncommon for the response team to be deployed in those situations. It's an intentional attention given to the importance of healing. And again, how do you save vital congregations and not offer this resource? So the two questions I would put before you today, as you go forward in your role as district superintendent and in your role as DCM, ultimately, how will my action or inaction bring healing for the victim and accountability for the offender? When you ask that question, I'm not suggesting in that question that there not be healing for the offender. I absolutely am. And we say in our Book of Discipline that there will be healing for all people affected and involved. But it is important that we do what we say we will do. And what we say we will do is respond in a way that holds people accountable for their behavior and offers healing to the people who have been hurt. How will your action or inaction help make justice and restore integrity in ministry? A lot of people argue with me on a lot of things, but I've yet to find anyone who will argue with me about the importance of maintaining integrity in ministerial relationships. Well, when the boundary is violated and sexual misconduct happens, the integrity, the sacred trust has been forgotten and it has been broken. So at the General Commission on the Status and Role of Women, we offer two broad positions to help you. I've mentioned several examples of being in consultation with judicatory leaders within annual conferences. That not only includes telephone consultation and email consultation, but also training at the annual conference level for particular issues regarding policy, boundaries, and response teams. And then the other position that I fulfill, and again, it's the only position in the worldwide United Methodist Church, and trust me, we have situations worldwide that we are contacted to offer some advocacy for alleged victims. And so oftentimes people are confused. They don't know what to call what they've just experienced. They need to be able to talk openly and freely about the confusion of what has happened to them, and they don't have a clue about the policies within the United Methodist Church. Every time an alleged victim calls this office, one of the first questions I ask them is, are you aware that your United Methodist Church has a policy regarding the chargeable offense of sexual misconduct, and the process for filing a formal complaint. I can tell you to this day, July 24th, 2018, I've never had anyone answer yes. Everyone unanimously has answered no. I had no awareness whatsoever. So again, in your leadership role, how evident, how clear is your policy on your website? How often is any of this being visited in charge conferences? I personally, professionally think this should be a standard piece, visited regularly in charge conferences. This is what we do. More specifically, this is what I do, and I want you to know that this resource is here for you. A couple of other things that I would bring to your attention from a resource point of view are our two websites. We are responsible for housing the umsexualethics.org website. The packet of information that Jason provided to you, the first page is a screenshot of that website. I encourage you to visit that. It offers an enormous amount of information. It has links to all of the United States state mandated reporting laws. It has connections with all of the United States statute of limitations. It has information regarding the 13 states in the U.S. where sexual misconduct by clergy is a criminal offense. And some of you may be aware of that. Many of you may not be aware of that, but it absolutely is. And so all of that information is not only in your packet, but on that website. A couple of things that I would offer to you on our gcsrw.org website. We have recently, within the past 3 weeks, launched a brand new toolkit. It's #MeToo toolkit. It offers quite a bit of resources for small group conversations, for sermons, for prayers, for flyers to hand out and use within local congregations of churches. That toolkit was put together solely as a response of people from across the U.S. calling this office saying, we need some materials to be able to enter into conversation with people in our pews about what is happening and being brought to light in our society. The other thing that I will mention to you, many of you are aware of it, hopefully many of you have already signed up for it. We also convene the Interagency Sexual Ethics Task Force, and we'll be offering a 2018 Do No Harm Sexual Ethics Summit. It will be in San Antonio, Texas, October the 11th through the 13th. It is an intensive Train the Trainer event, and it's one that we have asked every bishop to send people from their annual conference who will go back and duplicate this training and be the key point person for that perspective track in your own annual conference. So you can find information about all of this on these two websites. And I think that does it for me, Jason and Ken. If there are other questions, I am happy to spend some time on those.
All right. Thank you, Becky. I'm keeping an eye here on the clock. So what I'll encourage folks to do is, I see the questions that have come in. Please, in the couple of minutes that we have remaining, go ahead and send in your questions. We won't have time to answer them during the live webinar today, but I will capture those. I'll send those over to Becky so that she can follow up with you, or if there's enough of the same kind of questions, perhaps even make that as part of the topic at Lake J coming up. And so speaking of Lake J, Ken, there are a couple of things that folks need to do to prepare between now and then. Why don't you tell us about that?
Absolutely. And again, let me just thank Becky for taking the time today and for the opportunity that we've had. Jason, thanks for your time to introduce this group of, this class of new DSs and DCMs to what a great resource Becky is for the work that you do. And again, you don't have to do this alone. That's the message that keeps echoing in my mind. As you prepare for Lake J, and we're getting closer all the time, we're just about, we're less than a month away. You've gotten a list of some books to read. I hope that you'll pick those up. That really will enhance your experience from the plenaries and the individual sessions that we're going to be sharing with you. There is a resource that you've been sent about the first year in a district superintendent's life, so DSs, you may want to check that out as well. DCMs, you will be in your own technical session track that we'll be working with just DCMs in the afternoons, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and we'll be sending you information about some special reading to prepare for that. And again, as you begin to see things that you might raise questions for you, either about the event in Lake J or about the support that you get for your work, you can reach us just by sending an email to ds-dcm@gbhem.org, and that'll be channeled to the right place, so those responses can be answered. So again, we're doing our best to pull everything together for Lake J, and I hope that you will be getting excited about it and making those plans as well. I do want to put Becky's email address up here one more time so that you, if you hadn't had a chance to get it down, that you will get that down and know that she's a resource available to you. And remind you, the DSDCM orientation is an event that is actually co-sponsored and led by the Council of Bishops, who chair this design team in planning this, but also your General Board of Higher Education and Ministry and Discipleship Ministries, that we can come together and resource you. I know that you have another pre-event webinar coming up this week. We're sorry that two of them wound up in the same week, but I appreciate your dedication to follow up and getting yourself prepared. And Jason, as we get ready to close out, thanks always for your help and leadership in keeping the technology going smoothly. So thanks again for the time that you spent here. We're looking forward to seeing you at Lake J. We know we're going to have a beautiful couple of days together in a gorgeous setting, a time to try and get you as ready and to build relationships that are going to sustain you through the work that you've been called to do. So blessings on you. Get as much rest as you can in these summer months before the fall hits in full speed. And it's good to be with you today. Take care and God bless.